I am 75 years old and I hate the 21st century. I hate this time when real things have been replaced by plastic junk and real people by people who can't even drive a nail into a wall. My name is Lloyd Kemble, and I'm not going to pretend to like what has become of this world. The cold November rain drums on the roof of my house in Spokane, a house I've paid off for 32 years and in which I now live alone. The morning hours are the hardest. My joints are twisted as if someone has decided to take revenge on me for all the wrongs of my youth. To get my blood flowing, I force myself to do 10 squats before I go downstairs and prepare the usual breakfast. 2 eggs, toasted bread, and strong black coffee without sugar. Since Virginia left 5 years ago, I've been eating breakfast alone. Sometimes I turn on the television, not for the program, but for the voices. The announcer is talking about some riots on the other side of the country, but I don't care. I have my own riots in my head. After breakfast, I reach for my left wrist to check the time, but there's no watch there. Instead of the smooth coolness of the gold Vacheron Constantine case, there's only the pale mark on my skin from years of habit. I grunt and walk into the living room. On the mantelpiece, on the tables, in the dresser drawers, they're nowhere to be found. Damn sclerosis, I mutter, though I still have a better memory than half the idiots in my 30s. I remember the day I bought this watch like it was yesterday. March 26, 2001. The day I made the last payment on the house. The day Lloyd Kemble could finally say his house was his alone. Not the bank, not the government, me. I could burn it to the ground if I wanted to, and no one would have the right to stop me. It took me 2 months to choose the watch. I went shopping, studied catalogs, even looked on the internet, although I always considered computers a bliss for idlers. Vacheron Constantine, the oldest watch manufacturer in the world, founded in 1755 year. When the watchmaker told me this, something clicked inside. I've always respected tradition and craftsmanship. My print shop downtown was also a kind of homage to a craft that was dying out. $12,000. That's what this watch cost back then. Almost all of my savings set aside for a rainy day. Virginia was furious. "Are you out of your mind?" she shouted. "12,000 for a piece of metal on your arm. What if you get robbed? What if you break them?" But I was adamant. For the first time in our life together, I had bought something expensive, not for the house, not for the business, not for her or my son, for myself. This watch was my personal memorial, a memorial to a man who started out as a printer's helper with a $3 an hour wage and ended up owning his own print shop, a house, and a car. Howie, my son, didn't get it either, but he was in his early 30s then, and the only thing he was interested in was how to impress some girl at the bar. He'd always been like that, superficial, frivolous, just like his mother. A smart guy, no doubt, but no backbone, no character. "Dad, you could buy a new car with that money," he said then, as if a new car could compare to a thing built with such craftsmanship that it would outlive him and me, and maybe even his kids, children. Howie has one son, Brock. It's a funny name, like the name of a vegetable, but he was chosen by Audrey, my sister-in-law. Audrey, with her fashion magazines and her constant talk of career advancement. 13 years they've been married, and I still don't understand what my son saw in her, except for her pretty face. No, I do. She knows how to control him, and Howie's always needed someone to control him. First his mother, now his wife. I sigh and keep looking for the watch. The last time I saw it. When? Right, at a family dinner about a month ago. They come to see me once a month, like they're doing their duty. I pretend to be happy to see them. They pretend to be happy to see me. Brock, who's 12 now, sits staring at his phone. Howie talks about his job at the drug company like he's saving the world, not selling drugs to doctors for dinners at expensive restaurants. That evening, I noticed the boy looking at my watch. "Do you like it, son?" I asked, taking it off and holding it out to him. Brock nodded, suddenly showing interest in something that wasn't flickering on the screen. "They'll be yours someday, unless your dad decides to sell them as soon as I drop my skates," I said, watching Howie's reaction. He pursed his lips but remained silent. Audrey fake laughed and said something about it being too soon for me to think about dying. I remember putting the clock on the table to help Howie with the jam closet door. And uh, then what? I don't think I put it back on. Dinner was over, they left, and I went to bed. The next morning, the watch was nowhere to be found. I looked all over the house. I looked under the couches, checked the pockets of all the jackets, even went into the trash can, thinking I might have accidentally swiped it off the table. Nothing. I didn't call Howie. What am I going to say? Son, your old man's lost his mind and lost a watch worth a small car? No. It was enough that last time he noticed how I'd forgotten the name of the neighbor I'd lived on the same street with for 30 years. Dad, maybe you should see a doctor. It's not normal to forget things like that, he said then. There was anxiety in his voice, but I heard something else too. Impatience. A desire to get the problem out of the way and get back to my life as soon as possible. I swore to myself that I would never again give him any reason to think I was losing my grip. Lloyd Kemble had never been a burden and would not be one in the future. So I kept looking for the watch myself, hoping that one day it would just turn up in some unexpected place. Maybe I put them in the freezer, like I once did with my wallet, or they piled up behind the couch, or I'd put them away in the safe and now I couldn't remember it. But as the days went by, I couldn't find the watch. I started wearing a cheap electronic watch I bought at the supermarket for 20 bucks. It kept time as well as a Vacheron, but every time I looked at it, I felt cheated, like I hadn't lost a thing, but a part of myself, a part of my history. I was brought out of my musings by a phone call. Howie. Immediately, I wanted to not answer it, but I picked it up anyway. Hey, Dad, how are you? His voice sounded strained. I'm fine. Why are you calling on a work day? Did your rich pharmacist give you the day off? Actually, I was wondering if we could reschedule Sunday lunch. We've got some unforeseen circumstances. I snickered. This was the third time in 2 months they'd canceled a visit. What kind of contingency? Did your wife sign up for a massage again on her only free time? Dad, don't get me started. Brock has a competition. We can't miss it. Sure. Who am I to compete with a competition for whatever it is your son does? Pressing buttons on his cell phone? It's swimming, Dad. You know Brock's been swimming for 3 years. Look, I've got to run. I'll call you back this weekend. He hung up before I could answer. Typical. Running away from a conversation as soon as it becomes uncomfortable. I put the phone away and looked at my wrist again. The pathetic electronic clock was showing 10:37. I had a doctor's appointment for 11:30, so it was time to get ready. Another pointless visit where they would tell me I was in great shape for my age and then write me a prescription for pills I wouldn't take. As I walked past the fireplace, I looked at the mantelpiece for the 100th time. There were framed photos. Virginia on our wedding day, Howie in his graduation robe, Brock as a baby in his mother's arms. A typical family altar. But the things that really mattered to me weren't there. Where the hell are you? I muttered, as if the clock might hear and call back. Deep down, I knew I'd never see them again. And the thought gave me an emptiness in my chest that was more than could be explained by the loss of even the most precious thing. The dresser drawers in the bedroom, the closet in the hallway, the pantry under the stairs. Even the attic, I searched every inch of my house, but the clock seemed to have vanished. It was starting to drive me crazy. I even considered calling the maid who comes every 2 weeks to ask if she'd seen it, but that would mean admitting that I'd lost it, that I was becoming an absent-minded old man. No, I couldn't afford that. I went through the house again that morning, methodically checking every drawer, looking under every pillow. There was still an old magnifying glass on the living room table, the one I'd pulled out yesterday to examine the gaps between the floorboards. In a house nearly 80 years old, such crevices abounded. Abandoning this pointless endeavor, I sank into a chair and closed my eyes. Strange how a thing can become a part of you. For 30 years, I'd worn that watch every morning, only took it off before I went to bed and showered. They were with me at Virginia's funeral, at Howie's wedding, at the birth of my grandson. They were witnesses to my entire life. I still remember the day I opened the print shop. September 1st, 1977. A small space on the outskirts of town, one old printing press bought from a bankrupt competitor, and me, a 30-year-old idiot with a head full of big dreams. Virginia supported me then. You're going to make it, Lloyd. If anyone can do it, it's you. She always had a knack for finding the right words, at least in the early years of our marriage. Then things changed. Business grew, but with every success, the chasm between us grew. She wanted me to spend more time at home with her and Howie. I wanted to secure a future for them that could only come with hard work. Howie doesn't need a big house or an expensive school. He needs a father, she said. What good is a father who can't provide for his family? I replied. That's how we lived, in a constant standoff that eventually turned into a Cold War where there are no winners. Virginia died of lung cancer. A lifelong smoker, despite my protests. It's my body and I'll do what I want with it, she said. And she did, until the last day. Howie didn't cry at the funeral. He stood stone-faced, holding the hand of Audrey, who was by then his wife. I thought he was blaming me for my mother's death. Maybe he was. Maybe he thought that if I made her happy, she wouldn't cling to cigarettes like a lifeline. After the funeral, we didn't talk much. Sometimes he'd call, ask how I was doing. I'd tell him I was fine. He'd say he was fine too. We both knew we were lying. Then Brock was born. It was the first time I saw something real in my son's eyes, a mixture of pride and terror. Dad, how did you and Mom manage? I'm afraid to even hold him in my arms, he confessed to me in the hallway of the hospital. We didn't. Just doing the best we could and hoping we didn't do anything irreparably stupid, I replied. He laughed then. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. But the rapprochement didn't happen. Audrey quickly took control, and soon I was back to being just a mandatory item on their family calendar. A visit to Daddy Grandpa, every last Sunday of the month. I never really understood what happened to Howie. As a kid, he was a lively, inquisitive boy. I remember us taking apart an old radio receiver together, and him flooding me with questions about every part. How he would help me in the print shop on weekends, proudly wearing an apron with the Kemble printing logo on it. When did it all go wrong? Maybe the day he announced that he didn't want to go into printing, but was going to study marketing in college? I didn't hide my disappointment. For 50 years, I'd been building a business that should have gone to him. The tradition, a legacy, and he'd thrown it all away for a job where you have to smile and shake hands. The print business is dying, Dad, he said then. Everything's going digital. You said yourself there's fewer orders. He was right, damn it. But was it just about business? It was about principle. It was about continuity. It was about knowing that something would be left behind, that you didn't live your life for nothing. Eventually, I sold the print shop to a young couple who dreamed of revitalizing craft printing. They paid me a ridiculous amount of money in installments, but I didn't care. What mattered was that the place where I'd spent most of my life didn't turn into just another coffee shop or fancy clothing store. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my memories. It was Ray Porter, the only person in Spokane I could call a friend. We'd met 40 years ago when he'd ordered business cards from me for his car service. Lloyd, are you up or are you still snoozing, you old slacker? His voice rumbled through the receiver. I get up at 6 in the morning every day. Unlike some slackers, I muttered, but my lips stretched into a smile of their own. Listen, did you hear about the new value buyout on Riverside Avenue? It opened a month ago. I was driving by, saw the sign. So what of it? Do I look like someone who needs to turn in the family silver to pay the bills? No, just thought you might be interested. They say they have a watch expert, a real craftsman from Switzerland or somewhere. Maybe he could find parts for your antique walkers. I froze. A watch expert. Where exactly on Riverside? I asked, trying to keep my voice sounding nonchalant. I don't remember the exact house number. Somewhere between the old drugstore and that new restaurant with the pretentious name. You can't miss it. The sign's bright. Okay, maybe I'll stop by. I'll see what kind of charlatan pretends to be an expert. We talked some more. About the weather, about politicians who get stupider every year, about the back pain that keeps Ray up at night. The usual conversations of two old men clinging to normalcy in a world that has long since left them behind. After the call, I couldn't sit still. The thought of the buyout kept me on my toes. Sure, the chances of my watch somehow ending up there were slim to none. But what if Howie found it after dinner and took it? What if he thought he needed it more than I did? No, that's crazy. My son may be anything but a thief. He'd rather ask for money than steal something from me. although lately he doesn't even ask for it. Proud of himself. Or maybe Audrey told him not to. I remembered their strange behavior the last few months. Canceled visits, tense phone conversations. One day I called Howie at work, and the receptionist said he was taking the day off. When I called him back at home, Audrey said he was in a meeting with a client. A clear contradiction, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. Maybe they're in trouble. Financial, or worse, marital problems. Howie never told me about his difficulties. It was as if admitting weakness to his father was worse than weakness itself. I got up and headed for the bathroom. After I washed and shaved, I took a long look at my reflection in the mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair, eyes that had lost their luster, just as they should be at my age. But some things hadn't changed, the stubborn chin and the look that Virginia called Kemble's signature look. Well, Lloyd, I said to my reflection, it's time to check out what kind of thrift shop has popped up in our town. I put on my best tweed jacket, slipped my wallet into my pocket, and walked out of the house. The old Buick started on the third try. I could have bought a new car a long time ago. I had the money, but why? This car had served me well for 20 years, and as long as it drove, I saw no point in changing it. On the way downtown, I thought about how Spokane had changed in the years I'd lived here. The old family-owned stores had given way to faceless chain establishments. Places where everyone knew each other by name were gone, replaced by coffee shops with baristas who wrote your name on the cup to give the illusion of a personal touch. I found a thrift shop exactly where Ray had said it would be. The brightly colored sign read, accurate appraisal, fair price, immediate payment. Parking across the street, I sat in the car for a while, watching the entrance. Within 15 minutes, 3 people came in, an elderly woman with a small box in her hands, a young guy in ragged clothes, and a middle-aged man with a bulky bag. Finally, I made up my mind. Not that I really expected to find my watch there, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe the owner was the watch expert Ray was talking about. Maybe he could help me find a replacement for my Vacheron? No, there was no way to replace it. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Glass cases of jewelry, shelves of antiques, a small counter in the corner, behind which sat a skinny man in his 50s, with thick glasses. "What can I do for you, sir?" he asked as I approached. "Just looking around. I hear you have a watch expert." "Oh, you mean Gustav. He only comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today is Wednesday, so you'll have to come in tomorrow if you need a consultation." "I'll think about it," I said, looking through the display cases. "How long have you been open here?" "A little over a month, but business is going well. Times are tough these days. People are selling valuables." I nodded, moving from window to window. Suddenly I froze. In one of them was a wristwatch very similar to mine. My heart beat faster. I leaned over, peering at the small plaque with the description. "Rolex 1990s, gold steel." Not mine. Of course it wasn't mine. What made me think I'd find it here in the first place? "Interested in watches?" The man approached me. "I had a Vacheron Constantine once. Gold case, leather strap, a real work of art." "Oh, a Vacheron!" His eyes lit up. "This is truly the elite of the watch world. It's rare to find one of these in our town. What happened to them?" "Lost them," I answered briefly. "Tell me, have any such watches been brought to you lately?" "No, sir," he shook his head. "Such a thing I would have remembered. May I write down your phone number in case they show up?" "No need." I turned away from the display case. "If they do come up, it won't be in a place like this. No hard feelings." "None, sir," he smiled, but there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. I was about to leave when the doorbell jingled and a new visitor entered the thrift shop. I turned around and froze in place. Standing in the doorway was Audrey, my sister-in-law. She held a small purse in her hands, clutching it to her chest like she was afraid someone would take it away. She hadn't noticed me yet, talking to someone on the phone. "Yeah, I'm already there." "No, don't worry. I'll get it all done." She faltered when she saw me. Her face went white. I retreated behind a rack of antique candlesticks, hoping she didn't recognize me. My heart was pounding like crazy. What is Audrey doing in the thrift shop? What's in her purse? Could it be? I braced myself against the rack, feeling the sweat beading on my forehead. Audrey, clearly nervous, quickly ended the phone call and approached the counter. I tried to breathe slowly, fighting the dizziness. My thoughts were rushing erratically through my head, the recent strange behavior of Howie, the canceled visits, the nervous phone calls. It was all starting to add up to a frightening picture. "What can I do for you?" the skinny salesman asked, turning to Audrey. "I called yesterday about appraising an antique clock." Her voice sounded quieter than usual. "Oh yes, I remember. Have a seat. What do you have there?" Audrey lowered herself into a chair at the counter and opened her purse. I froze, afraid to move. She pulled out a small package wrapped in a soft cloth. She slowly unwrapped it. I couldn't see the contents, but the way the salesman whistled approvingly made it clear. "Vacheron Constantine. A magnificent piece," he said with genuine admiration. "My watch." Audrey had brought my watch to sell. My eyes went black, and I grabbed the shelf to keep from falling. My first impulse was to come out of hiding, grab the thief by the arm, and drag her outside. But some cold voice inside advised me to wait and listen. "Yes, it's a family heirloom, inherited from my husband's grandfather." Audrey lied as smoothly as if she'd rehearsed the phrase beforehand. "Excellent preservation. May I take a look at the mechanism?" "Sure." I heard a quiet click. The cover of the watch opened. If the seller had really been an expert, he would have noticed the engraving on the inside. "LC for fortitude and patience." I had it done 15 years ago when I gave the watch in for maintenance. Interesting. There's an engraving here," the salesman said, and my insides clenched. "Yes, great-grandfather's initials," Audrey replied without blinking an eye. "LK. Funny, that could stand for Lloyd Kemble," the salesman laughed, and I barely restrained myself from jumping out from behind the rack. Audrey tensed, but quickly pulled herself together. "Yes, an amazing coincidence. So how much can you offer?" The haggling began. The salesman offered 6,000. Audrey insisted on 10. Eventually, they settled on 8,500. I listened to them haggle over my watch, my life, my symbol of success, and felt the anger rising up inside like red-hot lava. "Fine," the salesman finally said. "I can issue you the money right now. Cash or card?" "On the card, please," Audrey replied. I couldn't wait any longer. Stepping out from behind the rack, I headed straight for the counter. Audrey saw me and froze with her mouth open. Her face took on an ashy hue. "Lloyd." "Yeah," she stammered. "There's no need to explain anything, dear sister-in-law," I said with icy calm. I understood perfectly well. "Do you two know each other?" the salesman asked confusedly. "Oh yes," I smiled without a drop of mirth. "This is my sister-in-law, and this watch is mine. I'm sorry, but the deal is off." I held out my hand for the watch. The salesman looked questioningly at Audrey. She could have started to argue, but instead gave up, lowering her eyes. "Yes, it's his watch," she whispered. "I apologize, but I can't just give you that watch." The salesman frowned. "I need some kind of proof that it's really yours." The engraving on the inside of the cover, "LC for fortitude and patience." I had it done 15 years ago when I gave the watch to a craftsman named Moritz Heinemann for service. The serial number of the watch begins with the numbers 2571, followed by the letter D. The salesman opened the cover and checked it. His eyebrows crept upward. "You are correct on all counts, sir." He reluctantly handed me the watch. I took it, feeling the familiar weight in my hand, then turned to Audrey. "We'll talk about this later. With you and with my son." She didn't respond, just silently gathered her things and walked out of the store. I thanked the clerk for understanding and followed her. Audrey was gone. She must have run away as soon as she had the chance. I got into my car, put my watch on my arm, and sat there for a while trying to collect my thoughts. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my son's number. "Hello?" Howie's voice sounded tired. "Say goodbye to your inheritance," I said without preamble. "Say thank you to your wife." "Dad? What are you talking about?" "About my watch that your wife tried to sell at the thrift store 10 minutes ago." Dead silence hung in the receiver. Then Howie exhaled. "Shit. Dad, I can explain." "Not over the phone," I interrupted him. "Come to my place. Now." "Yeah, I can't right now. If you don't come to my house right now, not only will I change my will, I'm going to go to the police and report it stolen. Another pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I disconnected the phone and started the car. I didn't turn on the radio on the way home, preferring silence. I needed to think. Audrey's attempt to sell the watch seemed like an act of desperation, not just greed. What could have made them take such a step? Gambling? Drugs? Or something else? Less dramatic, but no less serious. By the time I pulled up to the house, the anger had subsided a bit, giving way to cold curiosity. I wanted to know the truth, the whole truth. Howie arrived 15 minutes later. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his cheeks, wrinkled shirt. He didn't look like the successful pharmaceutical rep he'd always tried to appear to be. "Come in," I said, opening the door. He walked into the living room and sat on the couch without taking off his jacket. I settled into the chair across from him. There was a coffee table between us on which I placed my watch. "Explain," I demanded. Howie ran his hand over his face as if wiping away fatigue. "Dad, we're in a serious financial hole." "Go on." "I lost my job, back in March." I raised my eyebrows. 6 months ago? And I didn't know anything? How did that happen? Downsizing. The new sales director decided to optimize costs. They laid off 20% of the staff, and I was among them. "And you hid it for 6 months? Kept coming here and pretending everything was fine?" He nodded without looking up. "Why? Why do you think?" Irritation sounded in his voice. "You always thought I was weak, a loser. Do you think I wanted to come to you and say, 'Hey, Dad, you were right. I screwed up'?" I leaned back in my chair. Had I really made him think that? That he couldn't turn to me for help? "I've been looking for a job," Howie continued. "Every day. Had dozens of interviews. But my industry is tough right now. Too many people laid off like me. And the watch? Why would you steal a watch?" Howie swallowed. "We couldn't pay our mortgage this month. 3rd month in a row. The bank threatened eviction. We only have a week left to make at least the minimum payment. And instead of asking me for help, you decided to steal my watch?" I felt myself boiling over again. "It was Audrey's idea." He held up his hands in a protective gesture. "I didn't know she was going to sell them. I really didn't. She said she'd figured out how to solve the problem, but she didn't elaborate. I didn't want to know the details." Convenient position, son. A very comfortable one. Not asking questions so you can be able to say later that you didn't know. Howie jumped up from the couch, his face contorted with anger. "What was I supposed to do? Do you have any idea what it's like to not have money for food for your child? To see your wife crying at night because she doesn't know how to pay the electric bill tomorrow? 6 months, Dad. 6 months I've been trying to manage on my own." Trying to make it on your own is stealing Dad's watch? I didn't steal it. I didn't even know they were missing. Audrey must have taken it the last time we were at your place. I remembered that night, the watch on the table. I was showing it to Brock. Then I got distracted to help with the closet door. It was possible Audrey had seized the moment and taken it. "Does Brock know?" I asked quietly. Howie shook his head. "We're hiding from him how serious this is. He knows I'm looking for work, but he thinks it's a temporary hardship." He sank back onto the couch as if all the air had been let out of him. "How have you been living all this time?" I asked. "First on savings, then on credit cards. I took random part-time jobs, deliveries, helping with moves, whatever. Audrey got a part-time job at the supermarket, but it wasn't enough." I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where had the cocky man who always bragged about his career and success gone? In front of me sat a broken, cornered man trying to keep his family afloat. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Because you would have said, 'I told you so.' Because you would have reveled in my failure. Because you'd help. But first you'd make sure I felt like nothing." His words hit me like a fist to the gut. Was I really such a terrible father that my own son would rather live in misery than ask me for help? I wouldn't, I wouldn't, I started but hesitated, because maybe he was right. Maybe I would actually say something like, "You finally realized I was right about your career." "How much do you need?" I asked instead. Howie looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What? How much do you need to pay off the bank?" "3,800 to pay off the debt. But Dad, I'm not asking you for money." What are you asking for? Forgiveness for your wife trying to sell my watch? Or for the 6 months you lied to my face pretending everything was fine? He lowered his head. I want you to understand. We were desperate. Audrey isn't a thief. She just didn't see any other way out. I stood up and walked over to the window. It was starting to rain outside. The drops were hitting the glass as if trying to get through. You know what pisses me off the most? I said without turning around. Not that she took the watch. It's that you think I'm such a monster that you're willing to commit a crime just to avoid asking for help. I heard Howie sigh heavily. It's not that easy, Dad. What's complicated about it? Dad, I lost my job. We need help. 7 words. You couldn't say 7 words? Would you do that if you were me? He asked quietly. I turned around. What? Would you have done it? Would you go to your father and admit failure? To being unable to provide for your family? I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't. Because he was right. I would rather die than admit failure to my father. My father, a factory laborer, always said that a real man solves his own problems. I grew up with that idea, and apparently passed it on to my son. We're both too proud, aren't we? I said finally. Howie didn't answer, but I saw agreement in his eyes. I walked back to the chair and picked up the watch from the table. I'll give you the money, I said. Not as a handout, as a loan. You'll pay it back when you get a job. Thanks, Dad. He looked surprised at my unexpected concession. But there's a condition. I need Audrey to come here and apologize in person for stealing the watch. And I want to know everything about your situation. No secrets. Howie hesitated, clearly unfazed by the idea of putting his wife in a humiliating position. It's out of the question, I cut him off. It's either that or no way. Also, I want you to show me all the paperwork. Account statements, loan agreements, everything. I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. He nodded, realizing he had no choice. I'll talk to Audrey. We'll come by tomorrow. Okay, I stood up, letting him know the conversation was over. And Howie, don't ever lie to me again, especially about important things. He stood up as well and moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. He just nodded and walked out. I went back to the window and watched him get into his old Ford and drive away in the rain. The son I had once taught to ride a bike. The son who was now almost a stranger to me. I raised my hand and looked at the clock that had returned to its rightful place. It ticked away, counting down the seconds, the minutes, the hours, as if nothing had happened, like the world hadn't turned upside down. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. My sleep was restless. I dreamed of the print shop burning with bright flames and Howie standing nearby, staring at the fire with indifference. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. I woke up in a cold sweat and couldn't go back to sleep. The clock read 5:40. I got up, took a shower, and went down to the kitchen. The usual breakfast eggs, toast, coffee didn't bring the usual satisfaction. The conversation I'd had with my son yesterday replayed over and over in my head. You'd help, but first you'd make sure I felt like nothing. His words kept me on my toes. Am I really that terrible of a father? Does my son really think I take pleasure in seeing him fail? I thought back to our relationship throughout his life. When Howie was little, I worked hard. Typing demanded attention, especially in the early years. I missed school events, sporting events, even birthdays. I always told myself I was doing it for him, to provide for his future, to give him an education, to build a business he would one day inherit. But Howie never wanted a print shop. As a teenager, he told me so explicitly. We stood in the middle of the print shop, the smell of ink and paper filling the air. I was showing him the new printing press I had leased, telling him about the prospects for expanding the business. Dad, he said, interrupting my monologue, I don't want to do this, ever. I remember paling inside, how I looked at my 15-year-old son, not understanding how he could turn down my life's work. It's because you don't understand yet, I said at the time. When you grow up, you'll understand the value of having your own business. No, Dad, it's not about age. I just don't want to spend my life among those machines, the smell of ink, and the constant talk of deadlines. I can see how it sucks the juices out of you, how you come home and all you talk about is work, how you miss out on all the important events in my life because I have to finish a rush order. I don't want that kind of life for myself. His words hit me like a slap in the face. He wasn't just rejecting the business, he was rejecting my life choices, my sacrifices, everything I thought was important. It's ingratitude is what it is, I replied then. I create all this for you, and you throw it back in my face. I didn't ask you to create this for me. For the first time in his life, he raised his voice at me. I asked you to be there for me, to come to my games, to ask about my friends, to be interested in my life, not to tell me about how one day I'm going to run the damn print shop. He ran out of the shop, slamming the door. We didn't speak for 2 weeks after that incident. Then we pretended it hadn't happened, but there was still a crack in our relationship, and it seemed to grow with time. I didn't support him when he decided to study marketing. I thought it was a frivolous profession, said he'd be wasting his time in college. I remember Virginia yelling at me after one of our fights. You're pushing your own son away. Can't you see that? He wants your approval, and all you give him is criticism. I just want him to make the right choice, I replied stubbornly. Right for whom? For you. What about what's right for him? I wasn't listening. I always thought I knew better. That my experience, my wisdom gave me the right to judge his decisions. When he graduated from college and got a job with a pharmaceutical company, I didn't congratulate him. I just said, I hope you don't regret your choice. And when he married Audrey, I made no secret of my disapproval. Not because there was anything wrong with her, just that she supported his independence from me, his decision to go his own way. She's manipulating you, I told him. She wants to cut you off from your family. How wrong I was. Audrey didn't cut him off from his family. I did it myself. By my nagging, my disapproval, my inability to accept his choices. And the result? My son lived in poverty for 6 months, but he chose that over admitting failure to me. His wife decided to steal to avoid asking for my help. What does that say about me as a father? As a human being? I washed the dishes and returned to the living room. My gaze fell on the clock on the mantel. I had taken it off last night and put it there, not wanting to wear a reminder of the betrayal. Now the sight of it evoked contradictory feelings. Pride in what I had accomplished. Bitterness at how much I had lost in the process. A phone call snapped me out of my musings. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. Hello, I said, picking up the phone. Hello, Lloyd. It's Audrey. I froze, surprised by her call. According to our arrangement with Howie, they were supposed to come over together tonight. What do you want? I asked, not hiding the coldness in my voice. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you. Alone, without Howie. Why? There are things you need to know about, and I want to apologize for what I did. I was quiet for a moment, mulling over her offer. What could she have told me that Howie didn't know? Or more likely, what he didn't want to talk about? Okay, I said finally. When? If I may, right now. Howie's at a job interview. He won't be back until this afternoon. Come over. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. A strange sense of unease stirred inside. What if the situation is worse than Howie described? What if they're in debt up to their eyeballs? What if it wasn't just about losing their jobs? 20 minutes later, a cab pulled up in front of the house. Audrey got out, paid, and headed for the porch. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. My sister-in-law looked gaunt, dark circles under her eyes, her hair in a sloppy ponytail. Elegant and always impeccable, Audrey now looked more like a hunted animal. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She walked through the house and stopped in the hallway, as if hesitant to go any further. Come on into the living room, I suggested. Would you like some coffee? No, thanks. Her voice sounded quiet, almost scared. We sat across from each other, I in the chair, she on the couch, just like Howie and I had yesterday. The clock on the mantel seemed to be watching us, counting down the seconds of silence. I want to apologize, Audrey began, looking me in the eye. What I did is unforgivable. I stole from you, from a man who has always treated us well despite our differences. I have no excuse. Howie said you were desperate, I remarked. Yes, but that doesn't excuse stealing. Yeah, I don't know what came over me. Saw the clock on the table that night and thought it was the solution to all our problems. An act of desperation, like Howie said. A stupid, unforgivable act. She lowered her eyes and I saw her fingers nervously rubbing the edge of the bag. I suddenly felt sorry for her. Only now did I realize what a burden it must be for her to realize her husband had lost his job, and his proud father would probably gloat. Howie told me about the situation, I said, about him losing his job 6 months ago, about the problems with the mortgage. Audrey nodded, but something in her look told me that wasn't the whole story. What else do I need to know? I asked bluntly. She took a deep breath, as if about to dive into icy water. Howie didn't just lose his job. He was fired for a mistake he didn't make. I frowned, not sure what she was getting at. His immediate supervisor was using the department's budget for personal purposes. When it was discovered, he blamed it on his subordinates, including Howie. The company conducted an internal investigation, but ended up just firing everyone involved, including the supervisor. And Howie didn't try to clear his name? Tried, went to the labor inspectorate, even a lawyer, but he couldn't prove anything. And without references from past jobs, it's almost impossible to find a new one in this industry. Everyone thinks he was stealing from the company. I felt anger rising inside, not toward Howie, but toward the people who had treated him so unfairly. Why didn't he tell me about it yesterday? Because he was afraid you wouldn't believe it, that you'd think it was really his fault and now he's looking for excuses. Howie, he values your opinion very much, even though he tries to hide it. Those words struck a nerve with me. Was my son so afraid of my judgment that he chose to hide the truth? But that's not all, Audrey continued, and I noticed her hands trembling. We have debts, big debts, not just the mortgage. Credit cards, the consumer loan we took out to get us through the first few months after being laid off. Medical bills. Medical bills? I interjected. Audrey nodded and tears glistened in her eyes. Brock had some health issues last year. Nothing fatal, but it required surgery. Insurance covered some of the cost, but the rest? That's almost $20,000. Why didn't you tell me? That's my grandson, for crying out loud. Howie didn't want to. He's too proud. Said he could handle himself. That he'd prove to you that he could take care of his family without your help. I leaned back in my chair, feeling bitterness rise to my throat. My son was so intent on proving himself to me that he was risking his family's well-being. He always wanted to be like you, Audrey said quietly. Strong, independent, able to solve any problem. He admired you, though he'd never admit it. I looked at her in disbelief. Howie admired me, the same father who never supported his decisions, criticized his choices, put his principles above his happiness? It's hard to believe that, I muttered. It's true. He always told me how you built your business from the ground up, how you overcame hardships, how you never gave up, even when everyone around you said you couldn't make it. He wanted to be the same way, a person who never backs down in the face of adversity. I felt something clench in my chest. Was I really that ignorant of my son, or didn't want to see the good in him that was there? Now Howie's at a job interview, Audrey continued. It's probably the 100th one in as many months. He's trying to get a job outside his industry, but it's hard without experience. He's taken any part-time job he can get, a loader, a courier, even mopped floors at the mall for a few weeks. But it's not even enough to eat, let alone pay the bills. And you? Do you work? Yeah, at the supermarket, 3 days a week. I can't do any more. Someone has to be with Brock. We can't afford a nanny or after-school care at school anymore. I've been looking for a work-at-home job, but no luck so far. I looked at this woman I'd always thought of as frivolous, concerned only with material possessions, and saw the person in front of me, desperately trying to keep her family afloat. Why did you decide to tell me all this? I asked. Because Howie would never tell. He'd rather die than admit how bad it is. And I can't watch him suffer anymore. Our son asking why we don't go to the pizza place on Fridays anymore. How Howie hides bills from us and looks at job openings until 3 in the morning. She pulled an envelope out of her bag and placed it on the table. This has all our debts, account statements, loan agreements. Howie doesn't know I took these documents. He didn't want to show you the whole picture, afraid you'd see it as his complete failure. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. I didn't need to see the numbers to realize the situation was far more serious than I thought. What are you going to do? Audrey asked quietly. I looked at the clock resting on the mantel, a symbol of my success, my pride, something I put above my relationship with my son. I'll help you, I said. After Audrey left, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the closed envelope of papers. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another, more suspicious part of me doubted. Could this be another manipulation? The unfair dismissal story sounded too convenient, the perfect excuse for Howie, absolving him of any responsibility. I've always believed you can't blindly trust other people's word. My father used to say, check everything, even if your own mother said it. Perhaps the only person I trusted unconditionally was Virginia. Even when we fought, even when she said things I didn't want to hear, I knew she wasn't lying. But Audrey was different. I never felt the connection with her that a father should feel for his daughter-in-law. She always seemed foreign to me, with her ambition, her fancy clothes, and her constant talk of career advancement. Could I just take her at her word? I got up and went to the phone. My contacts in the Spokane business world had become fewer since the sale of the print shop, but a few useful connections still remained. One of them was Fred Pearson, my former client and now head of human resources at a large regional company. Fred, this is Lloyd Kemble. Yes, it's been a while. How's Marge? Good to hear. Listen, I need a little favor. What do you know about Metalay Pharmaceuticals? That was the firm where Howie worked. Fred had no direct ties to it, but he promised to find out what he could and call me back. I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened the envelope Audrey had left behind. Inside were neatly folded documents, bank statements, loan agreements, letters from the bank about late mortgage payments, and medical bills. I started going through them one by one, and as I read, my heart clenched tighter and tighter. Howie and Audrey owed more than $100,000 to banks and credit card companies, not counting the mortgage balance. They had less than $100 left in their checking account. The last paycheck had been dated March, 6 months ago, just like Howie had said. Since then, only occasional small amounts, apparently from part-time jobs, and regular modest receipts from the supermarket where Audrey worked. Medical bills corroborated the story of Brock's health problems. Appendectomy with complications, 2 weeks in the hospital, follow-up treatment. Insurance did cover some of the costs, but the balance was just over $19,000. I leaned back in my chair, feeling devastated. Was all of this really happening to my family and I didn't even realize it? How could I have been so blind? A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Fred. Lloyd, I have some information. Metalay did indeed have a major staff reduction this spring, but it wasn't just the downsizing. There was a misuse of funds scandal. As I understand it, several mid-level managers were accused, all fired. I don't know the names, but they say that some of those fired were just scapegoats. I thanked Fred and asked him to keep our conversation private. So Audrey wasn't lying, at least that part of it, but I needed more information. I dialed the number of another old acquaintance, Pete Hammond, owner of a small detective agency. I had once helped him with printing promotional materials, and he always said I had credit for his services. Pete, I need to check some information. By evening, I had enough information to put together a complete picture. The bank was indeed preparing to foreclose on Howie and Audrey's house for non-payment. Metalay had indeed fired several employees, including Howie, because of the embezzlement scandal. Although no formal charges were filed, the names of those fired were known in tight pharmaceutical company circles, making it much more difficult for them to find employment. Howie wasn't lying. He just wasn't telling me everything. And I understood why. My son always wanted me to be proud of him. Admitting that he'd been fired on the suspicion of dishonesty would have been too humiliating for him. I went back to the documents, studying them more closely. The amount owed was enormous for a family without a steady income. Even if Howie found a job immediately, it would take them years to get out of debt. And yet, part of me was still angry. Not so much about stealing the watch, though, that was unforgivable too, but about the months-long deception. I could have helped them sooner, put them out of a lot of misery, if only they'd come to me right after Howie was fired. But would we be able to move forward if I just gave them money? Wouldn't that become another stumbling block between us? Howie would probably feel indebted, and I'd be afraid he'd get in trouble again and hide it from me again. No, a simple solution won't work. We need something more fundamental, something that would change the very nature of our relationship. By 8 p.m., I knew what I was going to do. Howie called and canceled our visit with Audrey, saying I needed time to think. He sounded tense, clearly afraid I was reneging on my promise to help. Don't worry, I told him. I haven't changed my mind. I just need to weigh everything. Come back tomorrow, all of you together. Bring Brock, too. Brock? Why? There was surprise in his voice. He's part of this family, isn't he? Besides, I haven't seen him in a while. After talking to Howie, I opened the safe where I kept my savings. In the years since the sale of the print shop, I had lived modestly, most of my money invested or kept in bank accounts. But I'd always kept some money at home, an old habit left over from my father, who hadn't trusted banks after the Great Depression. I counted the cash, $37,000, enough to cover Howie's most urgent debts and give him time to find a job. I could transfer the rest from the bank account. The next morning, I made another call to my old buddy Elgin Baker, owner of a chain of print shops. We had once been competitors but had become buddies over the years, especially after I sold the print shop and was no longer a threat to him. Elgin, I need a favor. My son is looking for a job. By noon, I had a clear plan of action. All I had to do was wait for Howie and his family to arrive. They arrived at 3 sharp, just as we'd agreed. Howie looked exhausted, but he stood up straight, as if preparing for battle. Audrey avoided making eye contact with me, apparently worried that I'd tell Howie about our conversation. Brock, my 12-year-old grandson, seemed confused and a little scared. I rarely interacted with him, another of my blunders as a grandfather. Come in, I invited them in. Let's have lunch first and then we'll talk business. I ordered food delivery from a nice restaurant. Roast, mashed potatoes, salad, pie for dessert. During lunch, we talked about the weather, Brock's school, the latest news, everything except why they were really here. I noticed Howie glancing nervously at his watch, how Audrey barely touched her food. Only Brock seemed to be enjoying the moment, gorging himself on the roast and talking about his swimming successes. After lunch, I asked Brock to help me with something in the garage, leaving Howie and Audrey to clear the table. Grandpa, what are we looking for? Brock asked once we were in the garage. Nothing, really, I admitted. Just wanted to talk to you in private. He tensed up, clearly expecting some kind of unpleasant conversation. Don't worry, it's nothing, I reassured him. I just want you to know that your parents are going through a rough time right now, financially struggling. I know, he replied quietly. They think I don't notice, but I see everything. Dad's looking for work. Mom worries all the time. We've stopped going to the movies and ordering pizza. I nodded, surprised by his insight. At 12 years old, I didn't understand these things yet. I want to help them, but your father and I can have a hard time to understand each other. That's why I need your help. My help? He looked surprised and intrigued. Yes, I'm going to offer your parents a deal. Money to help them get out of debt. But on one condition, your father must let me help him find a new job and be involved in your family's financial decisions. Dad won't agree to that, Brock said confidently. He's too proud. I know. That's why I want you there when I make this offer. Your presence might soften his reaction. Brock thought for a moment, then nodded. Good, I'll help. We walked back into the house and into the living room, where Howie and Audrey were already waiting. I sat down in a chair. Brock settled on the floor at my feet, an arrangement I hadn't planned, but it symbolically showed which side my grandson was on. So, I began, looking at my son. I know your situation. I know about the debts, the problems with the bank, how you got fired. I know everything. Howie cast a quick glance at Audrey, clearly suspecting that she was the one who had told me everything. Don't look at her like that, I said. I've done my own investigation. I still have connections in this town. So now what? Howie asked in a strained voice. Now I offer to help. I'm willing to pay off all your debt's mortgage debt, medical bills, credit cards, everything. Howie and Audrey looked at each other, disbelief mixed with hope on their faces. But I have a condition, I continued. 2 conditions, actually. I knew it, Howie muttered. First, you accept my help in finding a new job. I've already talked to Elgin Baker. He's willing to take you on as marketing manager for his company. It's what you're good at, and he's willing to give you a chance, despite the circumstances of your firing. Howie straightened, his eyes widening. Elgin Baker? The owner of Printfast? Yes, we're old acquaintances. The salary will be less than Metal-A, but steady, and with prospects for growth. And the second condition? Audrey asked tensely. I will participate in your family's financial decisions. Not supervise, participate. No major purchases without consulting me. No new loans. Weekly expense reports. Howie turned pale, his hands clenched into fists. So you want to control our lives? Dictate how we spend our money? No. I want to make sure you don't find yourself in this situation again. It's not forever. Say for a year, until you get back on your feet. It's humiliating, Howie exhaled. More humiliating than losing your house? Than not having money for food for your son? I nodded toward Brock, who was listening intently to our conversation. Howie fell silent, clearly struggling with himself. His pride was battling with necessity, and I wasn't sure which would win. Dad, Brock suddenly raised his voice. Grandpa wants to help. Please accept his help. All eyes turned to the boy. His face was serious and his eyes read wisdom beyond his years. I know we're in trouble, he continued. I hear you and Mama arguing at night. I see you counting change to buy groceries. I'm not a little kid, and I want us to be okay. There was silence in the room. Howie looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time, then shifted his gaze to me. Where are you going to get the money to cover our debts? He asked quietly. I sold the print shop for a good sum, lived frugally, invested wisely. I have funds, Howie, and I want to use them to help my family. Why now? Why not before? Because you didn't ask before, and I was too proud to offer. Our gazes met, and I saw in his eyes a reflection of my own stubbornness. Two Kembles, father and son, too similar to find common ground easily. I need to think, Howie finally said. Think fast. The bank won't wait, I replied. Audrey put her hand on her husband's shoulder. Howie, we need this help, for Brock's sake. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. Okay, he said, opening his eyes. I'll agree to it, on both terms. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. I had gotten what I wanted, the opportunity to help my son, the opportunity to be a part of their lives. But at the same time, I realized that this was only the beginning of the journey. The hard part, rebuilding trust, building a relationship, was still ahead. Then it's settled, I said, rising. Tomorrow I'll transfer the money, and on Monday you're meeting with Elgin. Howie got up too. We stood across from each other, father and son, separated by years of misunderstanding and resentment, but perhaps ready to take a step toward each other for the first time in a long time. The week after our conversation passed in a strange tension. I wired the money into Howie's account like I promised. I helped him set up a repayment plan, called the bank to make sure the mortgage problem was resolved. Monday, Howie met with Elgin Baker and got the job. Everything was going according to plan. Too smooth. I sensed there was something else lurking beneath Howie's superficial agreement. He'd followed all the terms of our arrangement, sent me copies of paid invoices, reported on the first week of work, even consulted when he and Audrey needed to buy a new washing machine to replace a broken one. But there was a resistance in all of these actions, as if every step toward me was difficult for him. On Friday, Elgin called me to tell me about Howie's first progress. Your son is a great worker, Lloyd, he said. You can tell he's a professional. Already he's come up with some ideas for a new ad campaign. He's been well received by the team. I felt a strange sense of pride. My son was succeeding in spite of the odds. Maybe there was more of me in him than I thought. On Sunday, they were to come over for lunch, our usual monthly tradition that had been sporadically honored lately. I prepared for this visit with the utmost care. I ordered groceries from a good store, even bought a new tablecloth. I wanted everything to be perfect. They arrived at exactly 2 in the afternoon. Howie looked rested, Audrey more relaxed than last time. Only Brock seemed a little tense, as if sensing something the adults hadn't noticed. Lunch started out well. We talked about Howie's new job, about Brock's school, discussed the latest news. It was almost like it used to be, before our relationship finally soured. I was even beginning to hope that our family was finally on the road to reconciliation, but everything changed when I pulled out an envelope and placed it in front of Howie. What's this? He asked, taking a break from his dessert. The expense report you sent me last week, I said. I looked it over and found a few interesting points. Howie frowned, setting aside his fork. What kind of points? For instance, the $250 spent at the sporting goods store. From what I understand, it's a new bike for Brock. So what of it? A defensive note appeared in Howie's voice. It was his birthday last week. We wanted to get him a present. Birthday? I shifted my gaze to my grandson. Brock, why didn't you tell me it was your birthday? The boy lowered his eyes, clearly feeling awkward. Yeah, I thought you knew. How could I have known? No one told me. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Howie interjected. You should have known. You're his grandfather. What kind of grandfather doesn't remember his own grandson's birthday? His words hit me like a slap in the face. He was right, and that only made it hurt more. You didn't invite me, I said quietly. Didn't even let me know. We thought you were busy, Audrey entered the conversation. You're always busy when it comes to family events. I felt anger rising inside. Typical manipulation. First not inviting me, then blaming my absence. That's not the point, I said, turning back to the envelope. The point is that you spent the money on the bike when you haven't even paid off all your debts yet. $250 could have gone to pay off your credit card. Howie stood up abruptly, his chair pulled back with a clatter. That's it. It's all about control. It's not enough for you that we honor all your terms, accountable for every dollar. Now you want to decide if we can buy a gift for our own son? I'm just saying that now is not the time for that kind of spending, I replied, trying to remain calm. And when is the time? When you decide. When you think we've earned enough of a right to handle our own money. It's not your money. The words came out before I could think them through. It's my money, and I have a right to know how it's spent. There was a heavy silence in the room, Howie's face contorted with anger and pain. This is who you really are, he said quietly. All you care about is control. Not family, not relationships, just power and control. That's not true, I objected. I just want you to learn responsibility, so you don't repeat your mistakes. My mistakes? His voice shook. What about your mistakes, Dad? How about the fact that you missed all the important moments of my life because of your precious typography? How about the fact that you never, not once, said you were proud of me? I opened my mouth to object, but the words stuck in my throat. Had I really never told him that? I was at your graduation, I finally said. Yeah, sat in the last row and left right after the ceremony because you had to get back to work. Howie grinned bitterly. You know who congratulated me first? A physics teacher. Not my father, the teacher who saw me 3 times a week for 45 minutes. Audrey put her hand on her husband's shoulder, as if trying to reassure him, but he shook it off. No, let him hear it. All my life he's thought I was a weakling, unworthy of the Kemble family name. All my life I've tried to prove to him that I was worth something. And now that I'm in trouble, he's got what he wanted. A chance to show me how worthless I am. A chance to control my every move. That's not true, I protested. I want to help you. Help me, or help yourself feel superior. Admit it, you like that I'm indebted to you, that I have to account for every purchase, like a child to a strict parent. I felt anger rising up inside me in a wave. Ungrateful boy, after all I had done for him. If you were a real man, I gritted through my teeth, you wouldn't have to answer to me. A real man wouldn't have brought his family to this state. And if you were a real father, Howie parried, I wouldn't be afraid to ask you for help. A real father supports his son, not uses his difficulties to assert himself. Brock, who until then had been silently watching our altercation, suddenly stood up and ran out of the room. Audrey rushed after him. That left Howie and I alone, breathing heavily, as if after a physical fight. You know what the saddest part is? He said quietly. I was really hoping that this time would be different, that you really wanted to help with no hindsight, that we could finally be a normal family. I did want to help, I replied, but I can't just watch you step on the same rake again. How you spend money you don't have. It was a bicycle for my son for his birthday, Howie exclaimed. Not a yacht, not a sports car, a simple bicycle. Do you really think I'm not entitled to even that little thing? It's not about the bicycle, I shook my head. It's about principle. It's about financial discipline. No, it's exactly about the bike, he objected. It's about you thinking you have the right to tell me how to live my life, how and what to spend my money on, how to raise my son. Audrey came back into the room, her eyes red with tears. Brock is upset, she said. He thinks he's the reason you two fought. See what you did? Howie looked at me accusingly. Even that moment you managed to ruin. Yeah, you're the one who made a scene over a simple question about expenses. No, Howie shook his head. You're the one who turned help into a way to control. As always, and he turned to Audrey. Pack up, Brock. We're leaving. Wait, I tried to stop him. Let's talk calmly. We can work this out. There's nothing to resolve, he cut him off. I'll give you all your money back, every dime of it, and I'll find a way out of this situation on my own. Don't be silly. Where are you going to get that kind of money? I don't know. I'll take out another loan. Sell the house. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that I won't owe you anymore. What about your job? You're going to quit it just to spite me? Howie stopped, clearly unprepared for this turn. No, he said after a pause. I'm not leaving Elgin. He's a good man, and I like the work. But I'll work for him, not for you. And to him I'll owe, not to you. He left the room. I heard him say something to Brock in the hallway, the front door slamming. Audrey lingered, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment. I was hoping you could get past this, she said quietly, that you'd finally find common ground. He's the one who ruined it, I replied stubbornly. His pride, his inability to accept help without turning everything into drama. No, Lloyd, it's both of you. Two stubborn people who can't give in to each other. Two people who are too similar to understand each other. She turned to leave but stopped at the door. Do you know what he told me yesterday? That he hoped to prove to you that he was worth something. That he longs to hear words of pride from you, for once in his life. With those words, she walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. I slowly got up and walked to the window. Their car was pulling away from the house, taking my family. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson. Maybe forever. Something broke today. Something that could no longer be fixed with a simple apology or a heart-to-heart talk. Too much has been said. Too much truth had come out. I returned to the table and mechanically began to clear away the dishes. The family dinner that was supposed to bring us closer together had turned into a battlefield. And I'd lost that battle, even though I didn't want to admit it. Was Howie right? Did I really need control more than family harmony? Was I really using his difficulties to assert myself? No, I told myself. I wanted what was best for him. I wanted him to learn responsibility, financial discipline, not to make the same mistakes I made, my mistakes. That thought stopped me halfway to the kitchen, plates in hand. What exactly were my mistakes? Hadn't I achieved everything I wanted? I had a successful business, a house, savings. I was never in debt, always living within my means. But there was another side to it. A wife who died without ever forgiving me for years of emotional detachment. A son who chose poverty over seeking help from me. A grandson I barely knew. I may have succeeded in business, but I failed at the most important thing. Family. I carried the dishes to the kitchen and returned to the living room. My gaze fell on the mantelpiece where the Vacheron Constantine clock lay, a symbol of my success, my victory over circumstance. I took it in my hands, feeling the familiar weight. I opened the lid, reading the engraving, LC for fortitude and patience. Fortitude, patience, qualities I'd always been proud of. But maybe they're what destroyed my family. My intransigence, my inability to give in, to admit my mistakes. I closed the lid of the clock and put it back in place. The house was empty, quiet. Only the ticking of the clock broke the silence, counting down the seconds of my solitude. I sat down in the chair and closed my eyes. Howie's words rang in my head. If you were a real father, I wouldn't be afraid to ask you for help. Was I a real father? Or just a man who provided for his family's material needs, forgetting the most important things, love, support, acceptance? The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out, expecting to see a message from Howie or Audrey. Maybe an apology? Maybe an offer to talk again? But it was just an automated report on the status of my investment. Numbers, percentages, graphs. All the things I'd been replacing real relationships with my whole life. I set the phone aside and looked at the clock. The ticking seemed louder than usual, as if they were mocking my loneliness. $12,000 for a piece of metal on my arm. And I couldn't save my relationship with my son even at the cost of $100,000. Maybe Virginia was right all along. Maybe the watch wasn't a symbol of success, but a symbol of my misplaced priorities. How I valued the material over the spiritual. How I traded the chance to be a good father for the chance to be a successful businessman. And here I am, a 75-year-old man in an empty house, with a watch but no family, with principles but no one to share the last years of my life with. Was the gamble worth it? Were my principles worth being alone? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I would never admit I was wrong out loud. I'd never tell Howie he was right about me. It's not in Lloyd Kemble's nature. I'm going to stand my ground until the end, even if it's a lonely end.